Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be addressing one of the most fun subjects in climbing, one of the most important subjects, and it is finger strength. In Swedish we call it nypet. And we're going to take a look at the three most common approaches to increasing your finger strength. And what this is going to be is basically my perspective as a competition climber, as a rock climber, but also as an amateur. So there's going to be I'm going to try to make everything as simplified as possible, but if you want the perfect information, find an expert and go talk to them. But hopefully this video can help you guide your way through the complexities of finger strength training and how you can improve on it. We're going to go through three big methods, one being the hangboard, and I call this the structured method. One being the system board or spray wall or board climbing, and I generally call that the random one, or the chaotic one. And lastly, we're going to go through campusing or campus boarding, which is kind of like the aggressive one. We're first going to take a look at how each one of these work on like a broad level, the pros, the cons, and what they are. And after we're done with that, I'm going to give a brief introduction to what I think is a good approach to one of them or each of them, and how maybe you can implement it into your own training as well. Without further ado, let's jump into hangboarding. So hangboarding takes its practice from the regular gym movement. Basically, we have three energy systems: the aerobic, the anaerobic lactic, and the anaerobic alactic. The aerobic is basically just pumping it out, having a load time of 2 minutes or more, and using your oxygen to generate ATP or energy to your system. And then the anaerobic is the more commonly used in climbing. The anaerobic lactic is when you have a load time of about 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and you're using glycogen stored in your muscles to produce energy. And lastly, the anaerobic alactic is like the max power type of thing, when you're having a load time of under 10 seconds. And it's kind of hard to navigate which ones of these are being used in climbing, because it's a mix of all of them and a mix of none. It's so dependent on what type of climbing you're doing. But the hangboard takes practice from this anyways, and tries to create a formula for how you can use this system into your own training. So how it works is we have two main protocols, I would say, the more commonly used ones. The first one is called max hangs. Essentially what it means is you do a max loaded hang for sub 10 seconds. So we're using the anaerobic alactic system. So we're using commonly 5 seconds of load time for this, and we try and pack on as much weight as we can within a range that actually is still safe, but it's still enough to get you kind of too tired to hold it for more than 10 seconds, and we load that for 5. It's a very common approach to increase your max strength in climbing, i.e. the max amount of force you can produce through your fingers. And the other version is called repeaters, and it's most commonly you do 7 seconds of hanging and then 3 seconds of rest, basically chalking up or like just wiggling your fingers a little bit and then on again. So we're doing it with a much lower load but for a longer duration, which means that we're training the anaerobic lactic system more so than the other system. Again, they're all being used in conjunction, but it's kind of focused on this. In the anaerobic lactic system, any exercise we do using that system will commonly build more muscle, build more volume than the other systems like the aerobic or the anaerobic alactic system. I know it's going really fast, but what you need to know is basically that repeaters are intended to build more muscle, but maybe not have as much of a load, and max hangs are intended to just maximize the strength that you can get out of your fingers when doing any form of hanging. So the pros. This is a very structured approach. It's kind of like, it's very easy to have a logbook of how it's going and to know what type of hanging you should be doing for each session that you're training with it. Of course, this is a great advantage, and it's something that makes it very trackable, and you can have a progressive overload. You can structure your training very well because it's always going to be roughly the same. If you're having a bad day, you reduce the load. If you're having a good day, you increase the load. Note it down so you can have something to work with for the future. The problems with both of these is that they're not especially sport specific, meaning that, of course, you are hanging on an edge when climbing, and it's an isolated exercise to help with that. But it's so far from being actual climbing that it's hard to say that, hangboarding is good specifically for climbing, for any climbing, because what you're doing is you're strengthening your tendons in your fingers, but you're not working them in any extended positions, you're not pulling. And primarily, and the biggest issue that I have with hangboarding is that when you're loading your fingers, you're doing it statically. Generally, when we're climbing, we'll be doing somewhat dynamic moves and having a form of contact strength involved, meaning that when we land on a hold, we want to pull on it as quickly as possible to be able to hold on. Because if we're doing static moves, fine, hangboarding is a great system, but it's quite rare in modern climbing that we'll do completely static moves throughout the entire climb, which means that the contact strength is the most important part, the fast nypet. Like as fast as you can contract is better for the base level of catching a hold. But then we need to be able to sustain our strength on that hold, which is where hangboarding can become a bit more relevant. But you also have to separate which of these is the biggest component to you not being able to do a move and you not being strong enough to hold a hold. So what this means is basically that it is a very structured approach. It is the most researched approach, I would say, to strength training within climbing and getting your fingers stronger. But it has a couple of downsides in terms of just not being sport specific enough and also not really having the right application for what we're looking for, in my opinion anyways. And you can debate me on this in the comments. That's very welcomed. Because another issue that I have with hangboarding is that basically when we look at tendons and when we look at muscles, there's different ways of strengthening them. A muscle is largely strengthened through eccentric exercises or contracting exercises, not isometric exercises, which is what hangboarding is. It's an isometric contraction, and then you just hold that for a specific duration of time, which will strengthen your muscles and your tendons. Isometric exercises are great for strengthening the tendons, but not ideal for strengthening your muscles or building your muscles. You will want a larger range of motion for this to happen. For instance, if we look at a pull-up, you could of course train a pull-up by holding it at 90 degrees, jumping up to a fully locked off hold, and then going down to an extended position. And you will progress at doing pull-ups over time by doing this. However, you won't necessarily build muscles and become better at pull-ups at the rate that you might want to from doing isometric holds. You'll still have the progression, but you might not get the same progression as you would get from doing something else, which is just actually doing pull-ups or doing them reversed, for instance, which is one of the more efficient ways to train. And I think hangboarding has this problem that it hasn't really been research to the full extent that I'd like to see it. Meaning that, for instance, if we do finger curls, that should, in my book, have a larger effect on your muscles being built than just doing a hangboard exercise and hanging off an edge. However, it might not strengthen your tendon enough, which will have a different effect to your body. And what you need, you kind of have to assess yourself. Do you need to build more muscle? Then maybe doing something like finger curls would be a better approach. But if you're just looking to strengthen your tendon, then hangboarding could be a good approach. However, and I made a video about this last year, kind of assessing this and discussing this subject for myself, where I did hangboarding 2 times per day with a very, very low intensity. And I personally noticed that my rigidity increased quite a lot. I'm not saying that that's the best approach, because I don't necessarily believe it is, but I think it's interesting that you can increase your hangboard capabilities a lot more by having a much lower load and increasing the amount of times you hang per day than if you just increase the loading strength, like looking at it as progressive overload, for instance, as you would in a regular terminology of strength training. Lastly, to finish up the note on hangboarding, for each of these I want to explain what I think the risk versus reward is. And I think the risk for hangboarding is incredibly low. It's at a 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5. It's very low. Like, you can do a lot of hangboarding, you can plan a lot of hangboarding into your training without it necessarily hurting you at all, as long as you do it, with a logbook and you have everything noted down and you know what you're doing. So it has a very high or a very low risk, and the reward, I would say, is more a 3 out of 5. It's not ideal. You won't change your life through hangboarding necessarily, but it can help you understand your finger strength and understand your capabilities and understand how much you can push on each climbing session, which in turn might give you a greater reward in the end. So that's why I think hangboarding has a big place within training and within climbing. And again, we'll do this for all of the subjects, but let's move on to the next one, which is going to be about system boarding. System boarding is like the holy grail to finger strength for many, and to some it's the one-way ticket to no more climbing for 3 years because you injured all of your fingers simultaneously. So first off, there's a lot of different system boards around the world. The moon board, the kilter board, grasshopper board. There's a bunch of different layouts that exist around the world, and what they allow you to do is to track the boulders that you do inside their app, and you can share it with your friends, your family, whatever, anybody, and you can compete against other people in the world. So it becomes this international outdoor climb on one single board, which allows you to really explore and expand on what you can do and can't do. And you can compare it to other climbers, which means that you have like a frame of reference in how much you're progressing. Generally, they'll help you strengthen your fingers like freaking crazy. You'll work a lot of body tension. You'll work a lot of things that you would definitely miss out on if you're just training on a hangboard to increase your finger strength. However, this being said, the biggest issue that a system board has is that it loses its trackability quite a bit. The only thing you can do is log arbitrary grades, which doesn't really necessarily tell you anything about how you are progressing as a climber and how your fingers are progressing, because you might just be doing bigger moves on bigger holds, and that's not necessarily strengthening your fingers, but more strengthening your entire body. So it becomes kind of like a chaotic way to increase your finger strength, because in all cases, anybody who trains on a moonboard or a kilter board, their fingers will get stronger right away. But the other thing is you're often working on holds, especially if you're climbing on the moonboard, holds that are incredibly sharp and difficult to really latch onto and hold. And so that brings another question, because you have to be so analytical towards how much your body can deal with, how much pain you can tolerate. So it's important to know that all the time, that when you're doing something like moonboarding, it's so easy to overdo it, which also becomes a bit problematic, because then you have to switch it to underdoing it instead. But again, if you, for instance, follow the benchmark systems that you can find in these boards, you can build a large base of benchmark grades and therefore get an understanding of, okay, I am at this level and I can improve to the next level in terms of grades. And again, they are arbitrary, but they're not that arbitrary. They're still selected by a large group of people and have a consensus towards them, which means that it is a way to track your ability to progress, but it might not necessarily be the ideal way to do it. However, if you think it's a lot of fun, it has a lot of benefits to it. Let's go into the risk and reward. I would say it's a 4 out of 5 in risk, because you will inevitably injure yourself if you climb on it too much on a board, specifically a fingery system board. You're doing like nasty holds all the time, every session. And so the risk increases because of that. You have to be a lot more analytical and know your ability and how much you can perform on it. However, the reward is also a 4 out of 5 in my book, because if you manage to train on it consistently, you'll basically bring all the aspects from other climbing into a more concise way of training. So if you were to switch out regular gym training with only board training, you would at least have some form of measurement to know that you are progressing, and you'd be able to work on very specific muscle groups through the board sessions. So if you do it once or twice per week, for instance, you're doing something very specific that's towards building finger strength and body tension. Again, that's a very sport-specific way to train your finger strength, going on a board climb. It's an incredibly sport-specific. It doesn't get more sport-specific than that. The only thing is, on a board, you're usually doing very similar movements. It's either big moves on slightly better holds or smaller moves on slightly worse holds, and you're always focusing on body tension. And when you drop that body tension, that's when you start to lose the ability to progress. That being said, for a lot of climbers, that's one of the most fun things to do, is just work on that ability to increase your body tension and feel strong on the wall, which a board climb will help you with. So, we're done with 2 out of 3. Let's dive into the most fun one, campus boarding. At least the most fun one in my book, and also the one that I have used the most throughout my training days. Campus boarding is kind of the mix between the two. It has a lot of trackability in it, in the sense that it's on a very structured board. All the holds are similar. There's nothing that really changes throughout the setup that you're working with. And if you have one at your gym, you can kind of just go to that board and you'll know what your level should be. It combines the benefits of a system board by being fairly sport specific. You're using your upper body to move in a similar way that you do on the climbing wall when you're doing campus moves, 1, 4, 5, whatever you might be doing. So it has this advantage of being very trackable and being very easy to understand the next step in your training. And also, if you're having a day where you aren't performing so well and your body's telling you rest, you'll know, because you can't do the moves that you usually do. It has a fairly high threshold on when you can start doing it. You can't really do campus boarding unless you've been training for quite some time and you have the upper body strength to pull between the holds. Because if you're doing it sloppily, you're going to injure yourself very quickly. So it has that negative downside to it, is that it's kind of hard to lower the level. On a hangboard, for instance, you would reduce your body weight through a pulley system, and on a moonboard, you would reduce the grade. But on the campus board, it's not really that easy to reduce the level. However, there's a couple of different ways we can train on a campus board that is more going towards like an easier and easier level. First off, we grab bigger holds and campus between them. But if you can't pull between them, we do one of the bigger exercises that I do on a hangboard, and one of the most important ones in my opinion, latches. So if you're strong, you'll usually do latches with one arm, meaning that you jump from the ground and jump a little bit up, not as high as you can, but so that your arm is slightly bent. Latch a hold that's okay enough for you to hang on, lock it, go to the next hold, jump down, and repeat this for a couple of goes. Basically imitating doing a hard move, going to another hold, getting ready to do another hard move. That's what latches are. It's a very structured approach. You should always be able to note down how much of this you can do and how much you should be able to do in the next session, and then lower the intensity if you need to. You can, of course, do this on bigger holds as well, if it's too hard on the smaller ones, and then just go down in size progressively and work your way down. And if you can't do it with one arm, which I guess most people would have a hard time with, you can, of course, do it with both hands as well, and it has a very similar effect. You're jumping with both hands, you're latching on, and here's where we're looking at this contact strength that I was talking about earlier. You're using this thing that's so important in climbing, meaning engaging your fingers as quickly as possible, as rapidly, just cutting them into the holes as quickly as possible. And if you do it with both arms, that's fine as well, as long as it's on a decent level for you. I give this one a 3 out of 5 in risk, because you, as with the moonboard, have to be very analytical towards your ability. Once you're starting to lack, once you're starting to catch things with extended arms or not very solidly, the risk of injuring your shoulders, your fingers, your elbows, anything can happen. And you have to really know how your body can manage with this. And if you're not doing it correctly, you will injure yourself as well. The perk is that it's very, very notable. It's trackable in every sense of the matter. You'll know because you've noted down before how much your body could do. And again, the reward is, well, this one is harder. I would say it's between 3 out of 5 and 5 out of 5. 3 out of 5 is if you are not very analytical, you're not noting things down, you're just going in and doing campusing and just having fun on the wall. Probably going to get stronger, but you might get injured. You might, have not very good sessions. You might not be very productive. But a 5 out of 5, if you track it, if you note the things you're doing down, and you note what didn't go right, what went wrong, you'll know if your sessions aren't the right sessions to train it on. And you'll know when to take a rest day or not to take a rest day. But on a moonboard, you'll usually just go, a spray wall in general. You just climb until you get tired. But sometimes that's not really the point you want to hit. It's better to know what your strength benchmark should be and then to work with those and improve those at every session that you're actually training something specific. Because in my opinion, if you're not training something specifically to get stronger at it, it's better to do a regular session on some regular boulders and just work on movement more so than strengthening your body, because strengthening requires trackability for it to make sense. Otherwise, you're doing something that's going to be counterproductive and in the end lead to injury in one way or another. Been a lot of information. I hope you guys are still with me. We're going to go quickly and lastly just into how you can implement these into your training. Starting off with a hangboard, an easy protocol would be to do max hangs before a session, before a climbing session. Because again, you can track what your ability should be at and then just go down in weight based on that. You'll get very recruited from doing max hangs, which will help you in your climbing session. And then you'll be able to climb a little bit harder, but also get the strength gains that you were looking for your fingers. I mentioned repeaters earlier, 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off. I think it's best to play around with both of these for a couple of weeks and see which one works best for your body and what you feel like is sustainable. For some people, I think max hangs can be really difficult because it can be quite a bit of a fluctuance in terms of how much effort you can put in it. It's usually easier with the anaerobic lactic ways of training, because the load is so much lower that you kind of push through it a little bit more. With max hangs, if you just can't hang the weight that you usually hang, it's hard to motivate yourself mentally in my book. But yeah, play around with one or the other and see what works best. With the system board, I think it's best to find somebody who's done it before and have them kind of coach you and show you through the different movements that are there and explain to you what you're maybe not doing ideally. Because if you're lacking your core strength or your finger strength or you're climbing sloppily on a board, it's going to be a lot more diminishing and hurtful towards your climbing and your finger strength than if you're doing it correctly all the time. You want to be as accurate on a board as possible. You want to climb as perfectly as possible on a board. It's okay to be a little bit more sloppily if you're doing dynamic movements or playing around in the gym, but I think on a board, since it's a tool used for training, you should be doing the exercises as accurately as possible. Same goes for strength training. I mean, if you're doing really, really bad bicep curls, like the ones when I was doing aerobic curls, that's gonna hurt you more than it's gonna benefit you. So find somebody who knows what they're doing and ask them to help guide you through the process of it a little bit. If that's hard for you to do, then finding good benchmarks for yourself and good goals can of course be a good starting point, and using the apps to figure out which grade base you should build to work towards the next step is also a good approach. And then lastly, for campusing, it's a difficult one, because I think for some people a good approach is to actually start off by just campusing bowlers in the gym and just playing around on holes and swinging and just getting into the groove of things. But I think for most people it's also good to, again, you start tracking it right away. You start off with latches to work on that contact strength, and then when you do actual campus movements, if you're new to it, make sure you do it on really good holds, because you're going to want to work on the back activation more so than the actual finger strength in the beginning of it. And once your body knows how to move and swing on a campus board effectively, then you can introduce the finger strength as well and make those work in composition, because that's what you're going to apply on the climbing wall later on. Okay, I think we're done. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. It took a lot of time to produce because I had to think these things through quite a bit and iterate over it to make sure I was saying things that I can actually stand for in the future as well, and, you know, things that I believe in. Drop me a comment if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you later. Peace, folks.